So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to make a lace up to the back of your dress. So I just cut out some sample pieces just so you have a general idea of what this looks like. So what are we looking at right now? So you're looking at what is going to be called the Modesty Panel. And the Modesty Panel is totally optional. You can add it to your garment or your dress. And it's just a panel that you add so that you can't see the actual person's flesh underneath. So it just covers it. So everything is just nice and cohesive. Some people just decide not to add this and just to leave the lace up by itself. But it's just something good to have so that you have this as an option. We're also going to be creating our panels here. I'm going to show you how to create your loops as well as the corresponding ribbon. So what I did here is, let's say this is the mock back of a dress. So let's say you have your dress. This is the center back of your dress. And instead of using a zipper, we're going to just have our loops. So what I do is, for my designs, I always like to back it with interfacing. So interfacing, if you've taken any of my other courses, I go into much greater detail on what interfacing is. So I'm not going to do that now. But what you're going to do is you're going to go in and measure out at about 1.5 inches for your interfacing. And you're just going to press that on the very edge of your fabric because you're going to fold this over. And this is going to be one sort of way that you're going to get support in your back so that it doesn't buckle when you begin to put these additional things on. So you're going to put interfacing here on both sides of your center back. Once you're done interfacing that, you're going to want to add just an additional layer of support so that when this closes and you begin to try to close up your back again, you're not dealing with that buckling. So what I like to do is also additionally add boning to my designs. So I take my ruler and I just sort of mark out where that interfacing stops. And I'm going to measure in at about 5/8 to let's just do 1/2 inch. So I take my boning and I just sort of measure it out about how much I'm going to use. Cut one. Since both sides should be the same, I'm gonna cut 2. To get your boning flat so that it's easy to apply, I recommend just quickly pressing your boning down. That way it's easier to apply to your garment. Sometimes when the boning is like this, it's a little bit difficult. So I just go to my machine and where I made that mark, right in that groove next to that marking that I did with my chalk, I'm just going to sew straight down. So you go in and you just sew straight down right into that groove, and you do that on both sides because what's going to happen is you're going to fold that over, and this is going to create a nice sturdy support for you to apply your loops on top of. So I'm going to go to the machine. We're going to see what that looks like. So we've got our backings. We got everything nice and supported. So you go in and you close these up. If you were just making these as inserts, all you would do is you would just cut the remainder off on this side, and you can actually insert these into a already made dress. So if the dress is already put together, you would just cut these slits off after you added the loops, and you can just insert these inside of them. Before we go on to adding the loops, you actually have to make the loops. So what you just go in and do is you take a 1.5 inch strip of fabric, whatever color you want. You can have the loops match, you can have the loops not match, and you're going to do it with right sides matching. So you pin straight down, press nice and flat, that way you don't get any tunneling or buckling. You pin straight through, and then you sew. Once you're done sewing, you're going to use that loop turner. So this is our loop. If you have a loop turner device, it's simple enough. Wait, you need to first go in and cut off the edges just a little bit so that it's easier to sort of guide through. Just be aware of that when you're cutting off that excess. Okay, so we're gonna run it through. When you're doing a loop turn, just make sure that you hook everything into place. So I'm gonna go around this way. This thumb area just helps me out as far as support. Make sure that metal clamp goes through. If not, you're gonna run into an issue where it unravels. I also do another twist around so that I have a nice anchor hold to it. And then I just pull through. Really quickly press this out so that it was nice and flat. Then I would come and get those pieces again. And now it's time to actually place these on your sides. So I'm just gonna make sure you can see this is gonna be the side down, and I'm just gonna show you what it looks like when I flip it. So I've seen this done many ways. I've seen people just sort of like do this where it just kind of loops. I've also seen it where people cut individually. I like to keep it continuous because it keeps the loops from snapping, because obviously this is something that's going to be pulled and tugged at, and I find that when they're separate they can pull apart. So when it's continuous, it gives it more support. And then you just make sure you have your pens handy and make sure you have the appropriate marking. So you have to decide how far apart each of these loops are going to be. So let's say I want them about 1 inch apart. So I'm going to mark from the top 1 inch, and I'm going to make my mark. From there, I'm going to make my mark. Not sure if you guys can see those marks, but I'm just doing it. And what you do to one side, you do to the other side. Okay, once I have those marks, I take my loop and then I just start. I like to start from that top part, and you really just have to eyeball as far as how far this is going to come out. And then I just place my pin there. Just be careful, it might be a little bit tricky because you have the boning there. So just mostly worry about the top layer. Just go in and just pin top layer and just keep going continuously down. You maneuver that, focusing on making sure as you're going that each loop is coming out the same distance, because if not, then it's not going to look very nice when you're ready to put it together. So you have to just, it's almost like you're doing a couple of things at once. You're making sure you have the right distance. You're making sure that each of the loops are coming out exactly where they're supposed to be coming out. And then you, as you can see, you just continue that straight down. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're doing it for the other side, what I like to do is before I actually finalize it, I make sure that the loops match. Sometimes you'll get here and then you'll do these separately, and then as you're lacing up your dress, you'll realize it's uneven. It's very paramount that as you're pinning, especially in the pinning stage, I would say that's where you really do it. In the pinning stage, just make sure that you're going back and forth, or I say, does the top one here match with the top here, and are they matching, which is another reason why you want to measure, because again, you don't want to get this whole thing sewn up and then realize, oh no, none of that matches. So once I'm done with all of my pins here, I just go in with my needle and thread, and I like to secure it once with hand sewing. So basically you want to baste it before I move it to the machine, because if you do it with just the pins, if the pin comes out, then you're sort of back at square one as far as making sure everything is in alignment. So I just go in at the very edge, because like I said, the boning is right here. So I go in, and I'm using, for mine, the fabric is it's a mixture of stretch, but also is satin, so it's kind of tough. So if you heard me grunting just to put that through, is because I picked a pretty fabric, but not necessarily a fabric that is easier to work with. If you're practicing this for the first time, I would say get a fabric that is easy to work with to practice, just until you get the hang of the method and the technique. And then you can sort of like play around with the types of fabrics you use. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to baste, and when you're basting, make sure that you are not skipping anything. So as you can see during my basting process, I'm all of these points, this point, this point, this point, because when it's time to remove the pins and you haven't basted everything down, it's going to lift. And this is what it'll look like on this side. And where you basted is where you're going to do that stitch. And as you can see, you already can see my loops coming into place. So we have our 2 loop panels. And now we need to create our modesty panel. So for that, what I did was, you'll see I just used some recycled backing from a dress that didn't work out. So I'd already interfaced the back of it. So I just decided, instead of, wasting materials and making a new one, I would just use the remnants from that. But this is essentially what you're gonna do, like the way you did with the sides of your lace up. You're still going to interface it. You want to use a firm, sturdy interfacing and line just the one side of it. But what you want to do is you want to just sew down your seam allowance all the way down and around. But what I do is I leave this part open. That way, when I'm turning it right side out, I can just sort of fold down, press, and then top stitch that portion so that I can have my modesty panel. Lastly, you're going to be creating the straps or the loops for your lace up. And what I've found over the years to be the trick is, the more narrow the loops are, you want to have a slightly wider belt. Why? Because then it really gives it that corset look that you want to have. In the past, sometimes if my ribbon or my tie is a little too thin, it doesn't quite come out the way I want it to. So I finally, after many years of trial and error, I realized the wider this is and the more narrow those loops are, the prettier the results. So on average, you want to at least make this, I make these the same way I make all my loops. You want to make this about 4 inches wide. You make it 4 inches wide, you fold that in half, and then you do about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you press it down. And you always want the length of this to be as long as possible, because as you're tying it, it's going to get shorter. Okay, so this is our corset. We can see how everything came together. We have our modesty panel. Normally this is a lot wider because you wanted to accommodate the entirety of the lace up, but just for the sake of this sample, I just wanted you guys to see what it looked like when everything was put together with your modesty panel and your loops attached. So the final thing would be to lace up your lace up. So I always say, I mean, there's tons of YouTube videos available. You can use this as a guide, but I always start at the top and then I work my way down. And another sort of useful tip that I tell myself is you want to lace as if you were tying your shoe, but in reverse. So normally when we tie our shoes, we go kind of out. When you're doing a lace up, you want to make sure you just go in the opposite direction. So I just sort of start out right here at the very top. And then I just work my way down. This is obviously a lot easier when you have like a stationary object attached to it, instead of it just being sort of free flowing on this table here. And then I'm adjusting as I go. So I'm sort of going on top. Here it is, your finished lace up back. So this is the way it looks minus the modesty panel. As you can see through it a little bit. And like I said, some people don't mind that design. They like to have that there. But for those who actually want that area to be a little bit more covered, that's when the modesty panel comes into place, and you can secure it with just using a snap on each of the sides. You can secure one side with a tack stitch just to keep it in place, because you want to keep that movable, or you can insert it into one of the sides as you're sewing it up so that it's more stationary. It's really up to you how you want that to be. For my Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Videos are uploaded weekly covering dressmaking, fashion, lectures, and more.